Hey, welcome to Module 11, Chapter 8, Resources. Our saga continues. This is actually the last week that we're going to be in the mechanics of project management. Um, we've gone through defining, we got up through budgeting, scheduling, and now resources. It's a really good sequence to keep in mind when you're putting together a project. And once we wrap this up, we'll kind of switch gears a little bit because we're going to move into project execution, and we'll look at some aspects of auditing, managing, controlling, monitoring, controlling, and closing the project. So please keep in mind that this is a process, and the process is iterative up until we get the plan complete. And at the end of this week, the program or the project plan will be complete. So we start with scope, then we start laying out that WBS, and as we recognize that maybe some things were left out of the scope, we circle back around and make corrections to the scope until we get the WBS the way we want it. Then we do our budget estimations, at which point, again, we may realize that we left some things out of the WBS or the scope might not quite be right. So we'll keep circling around till we feel like we've got all three pieces in sync again. Then we do the scheduling, which gives us our forward and backward pass. Again, we might detect some problems. Hey, it's going to take longer than we thought, or the duration's here, so we've got to, so again, you might go back and redo the budget. So now we've got the schedule down. We did our forward and backward pass. We know the duration. We know the start and stop times for each activity: early start, early finish, late finish, and slack. We know our critical path. And when we assign the resources, though, things can change. And so be very conscious of that as you look at the materials for this week's chapter. And we're looking at the resources, the materials, the equipment, the people, whatever is going to be needed to complete each work activity. And so as you assign resources, if you have a resource that's required for the project, but that resource is not available, that can potentially throw your schedule off. So it's going to put us back in the scheduling mode. Then from there, we pretty much move to execution. At the end of this resources part, we're going to have a schedule that we believe we can execute. And then if that schedule is firm, then we will have what's called a time-phased budget. And the time-phased budget means that we will have a good idea of which activities are going to be worked on in which weeks, which will then lead to how much we're going to be spending each week to complete those activities. So we'll basically have a budget that's not an aggregate budget, it's a disaggregated by week. So watch for that time-phased budget as well. So pretty typical lineup. This is going to be the last week of our typical lineup because we're going to go back to having our active discussion board where we'll talk about some articles and things. While we're in the mechanics, I wanted to more focus on the chapters, the quizzes, and the homework problems to make sure that you're getting a good grip on how to put these components of a project together. So again, this week, everything will just be due on Sunday, but I will say don't wait till the last minute because the homework problems, there's 3 of them, are a bit more complicated. They're done in Connect, and Connect will help step you through how to do the resource assignments and then also do some of the leveling in that. So this week's deliverables, the chapter content video. I'm going to cover some topics certainly in resources, but also there's a related topic, and the chapter just starts to touch on it, and it's what's called expediting or crashing the project. That's actually in the next chapter, which we're not going to cover, but I want you to be familiar with those terms at least so you understand when we're talking about having to speed up delivery of an activity, how we can do that, and I'll cover that in the content video. The chapter reading is a Learn Smart assignment, so it'll ask you those review questions before it'll let you finish. The chapter quiz is just 10 questions, but it's 1 attempt this week. The chapter homework is set up for 3 attempts with no penalty because I want you to be able to try each of these problems 3 times if that's what it takes to work them out. A time-constrained project is basically what you finished with last week, your forward and backward pass, and you assign the resources into that schedule. A resource constrained is more difficult, and that's where you'll go to assign resources, but you don't have infinite resources. So what will happen is your schedule will actually be extended. So even though last week you did your forward and backward pass and you may have found that the project takes 16 weeks, When you go to assign resources, the resources aren't available when you need them. That'll actually cause you to extend the duration of the project to 17, 18, 19 weeks. So don't be surprised when that happens when you do that problem. And then finally is the time-phased budget. So definitely allow time. I would suggest don't wait till the last night to do that, because those may take longer than you normally would allow for a homework assignment. So the Course Cafe is optional and open. The forum for this week is optional and open, and the Course Cafe is always out there, so drop anything you want out there. Definitely keep in mind as you're going through those problems, especially some of you that get into them earlier in the week, if you see some things, some hints that will help others. I've done these problems so many times that I don't see the problems that you will. So please feel free to share some helpful hints for your classmates to guide them through getting those homework problems wrapped up. So have a good week.